Good afternoon, one and all. I'm here just to educate. I'm not a spokesman for the Singapore government, but I'll give you a sense of how they're thinking about it. But before we do that, I should kind of give you a sense of the challenge that the maritime sector faces in decarbonizing, because it is a major part of Scope 3, actually, for a lot of the manufacturing industry. This is the audacious goal that IMO has set for itself. I love audacious goal because it stretches your mind and you have to think differently and it's not business as usual. But after 15 years since 2008, on the back of global trade, maritime managed to keep it flat in terms of emissions. So you look at 2023 and you look at 2008, it's really a flat, and that's on the back of global trade. So a lot of the energy efficiency measures that kicked in actually helped to keep it flat. Now we have to reduce in half the time between now and 2030. That's how audacious it is, because we tried for 15 years and we only managed to get this far. And global trade is going to continue to go up. So how is this going to happen? It's going to require a multi-pronged approach. There's no one solution in this whole thing. And that's why when you think about changing fuels or energy efficiency, carbon capture solutions, all this will make a difference. Even ships are being redesigned for efficiency. So the newer ships will follow the EEDI policy that really makes it more and more efficient. So regardless of the decarb requirements, energy efficiency is actually a cost benefit to the operators, because you're just reducing the use of fuel for your transport, right? So this is how difficult it is for maritime even to meet the 2030 goals. Maritime doesn't sit alone. So a ship owner or operator can reduce its footprint by adopting energy efficiency technology. That's within their control. But IMO wants to target zero emissions by 2050. You can't get there just by energy efficiency, right? You will need to use new fuels. Now, when you start thinking about new fuels, port infrastructure, the interface becomes super critical. And all the red dots there are gaps. They don't even exist today. The green dots is something that needs to be scaled. The blue dots exist today, right? So you don't even have infrastructure at the ports to deliver the new fuels. Take Singapore, for example. If today we had green ammonia we could not get it onto a ship. You know why? There's no ammonia bunkering vessel. There are very, very different types of operating assets with different design considerations. So we need to also the ports need also to solve their infrastructure investment. And this is why 80% of the transition cost for the maritime sector actually sits on the land, right? It is the port infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. And this is the other big challenge. The other big challenge is all alternative fuels, other than being more expensive, and please don't think of getting cheap fuel, okay? The days of cheap fuel are gone, right? It's all going to be more expensive. Other than biofuels, all future fuels will have a deficit in its volumetric energy density, which means it needs bigger tanks for the same distance travel. So this chart gives you a sense of the deficits. You see hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, LNG, LPG, biodiesel, and that's fossil fuel. So the only way to reduce the deficit, to address both higher costs, low availability, and the low volumetric energy density, is to have energy efficiency tagged on it. So that's why a lot of ship owners today are preparing for this. So that's why they are investing in energy efficiency. Not enough, but majority of the major ones are already doing it because they can afford to. What is the constraint between a small and medium and major ship owner? The ship owner who has 700 ships can afford to pull out one. A ship owner with 5 ships cannot afford to pull out one. These are the actual real-life constraints for the shipping industry to even adopt energy efficiency measures. So, and they have to time it with their 5-year cycle where they have to go to the dry docks. So it's a bit complicated in that sense, okay? But a multi-solution approach is the only way we're going to get to net zero. in 2015. This is the other problem. All the new fuels today are very chemically different. They have very different operating conditions. They require specialized training for safety. We have 800,000 seafarers that need to be trained by 2030. And remember, these seafarers are not sitting in an office. They are at sea, right? And they're at sea for 6 months or 4 months, whatever the cycle is. How do we get training to them to prepare for this? Who pays for that? Right? And all vessels are different, right? We have tankers, bulk tankers, gas tankers, containers. They all operate very differently. So they all have different levels of training and capabilities. We need to bring up to speed a huge population of seafarers to be able to handle the new fuels, right? Um, and in 5 years, we expect digital transformation to actually even overlay on the complexity of operating a ship. So the seafarers are going to be bombarded not only with new information, new training, and also reduced manning on board the ships, which makes it really a strain to be away for 6 months from your family and working double time and trying to get 8 hours of sleep and operating in a very difficult condition. This is something which is acknowledged by the IMO and acknowledged by all shipping companies, and a lot of the ship management companies are really working hard to get the ship seafarers really up to speed in a way that doesn't actually make their lives more miserable than it is already. If you didn't know, suicide rates among seafarers are very high, right? So this is a major issue. Mental wellness of seafarers is a major issue today, and it's been taken seriously, and a lot of work is being done in that space. But we need to recognize it is not an easy transition. So what is Singapore doing? And I think this is a very important thing. Singapore being a major, in fact, the major maritime hub in the world, is doing a lot. The MPA has been very, very proactive in thinking of not only how to maintain Singapore's position as an international maritime center, but also how can it contribute towards that whole transition, right? So if you look at the government to government, they've set up, I think to date, maybe 11 green digital shipping corridors with different ports to how they can work with port nodes to help that whole transition happen, right? Both from a policy perspective and also from an asset availability perspective, both onshore and development. So that's a lot of big work going on there. The other thing is they're looking at the carbon value chain. If you can't replace your green fuel, you're going to still have to burn fossil fuel, but we still need to meet the reduction targets. And carbon capture, onboard carbon capture now is becoming more and more real in the last 12 months than it was 2 years ago. Because the realization that getting green fuels is going to be super difficult. Why? The major molecule that is required for marine green fuels is green hydrogen. Green hydrogen, I know a lot of projects out there, maybe 4% of them actually has FID. The rest is all being talked about, but no one's actually investing. Even if you did make green hydrogen from renewables, the renewable energy to make green hydrogen has competition from land side, your cars, your buildings, everyone wants green electrons. So to siphon part of that off into making green hydrogen so that you can make green ammonia and green methanol is a tall order. But IMO's targets haven't changed. So shipping is now saying, okay, how can we actually capture the CO2 on shore, on the ship, and then make sure it's locked away? And that work is also being done with the S2 project with ExxonMobil and Shell. They've done G2Gs with Indonesia, Malaysia to see how we can move CO2 out. It's more of a land-based solution at the moment. So Singapore is trying to decarbonize Jurong Island. Now, it is not looking at shipping currently, but once we get that supply chain moving, shipping can piggyback on it. And that's the approach at the moment, how they're thinking about it. R&D cooperation, left, right, and center, really trying to spur innovation in the space to help. And Singapore is putting money on the table as well to make sure that that is also happening at the same time. And of course, we all know that IMO leadership Singapore plays at the MEPC, is a co-secretary, and that's very important. So even though it's a small country, it actually has a voice of influence. In fact, the GFI pricing framework actually came out from Singapore, right? But they couldn't say that because they needed to have a more influential country involved. But they all were doing it together, right? So at the local uh, 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 at the local platform, on the policy side, standards and guidelines are very important. MPA takes an active process in developing bunkering standards for LNG, is started ammonia, is revised its biofuels requirement. So all that to facilitate the reliability of supplying fuels, right? Um, on capacity building, the Singapore Maritime Foundation and the Maritime Energy Transformation program at Singapore Poly is training. They have 27 industry players when they're trying to facilitate this whole training gap, and that's going on as well. On innovation, Singapore Maritime Institute, where I used to be, and the Mint Fund are their money there for innovators to tap on to innovate the next solution for the maritime transition. And obviously, in the industry side, they run a lot of Pathfinder projects. I was from the GCMD. We ran a number of pilot projects in Australia and China on the new fuels. So there is a lot of work. So Singapore government is taking every single angle it can to try and facilitate this whole transition. But those constraints, and I haven't even put in the page on constraints at the shipyards because I didn't have time on the PowerPoint. But that's another major constraint. So, but shipping is committed to reduce your scope 3 and its own scope 1, right? And finally, this is what I really hope that, in we take a holistic approach in policy making, but never forgetting the bottom of the pyramid. We need to raise the bottom up, protect them, and move them up in our entire effort to combat climate change. And of course, I always remind myself, people talk about the cost of change. I'm talking about the price of inaction. Thank you, everyone, for listening.